Aliens. Genocide. Chapter 6. Nice looking boat, huh? Daniel Grant flashed a cube shot to his date sitting in the restaurant booth next to him. She was a hot, big-busted brunette with her spangled dress spray painted on. Long hair, delicious perfume, and foreign territory for the old skyscraper man to plumb. He was impressing her with his nightclub, black and white dazzle all around, and now, for what reason he knew not, he was impressing her with his power that extended, even to the ends of the universe. Her name was Mabel. Weird. What kind of thing is that? Mabel spoke with a New Jersey accent, which gave her flamboyant body a certain earthly charm. That's a spaceship, babes. That's my spaceship. Pretty, huh? Pretty strange. What you want a spaceship for, Mr. Grant? I told you. You can call me Daniel, sweetheart. Just as long as your pretty fingers aren't anywhere near a keyboard. You're so kind to take me out tonight, Mr. Grant. Mabel batted long, thick mascara at him. And me hardly having worked for 2 days at your offices? And I don't care what the other temps have said. You're such a gentleman. Such a scrumptious meal. Such delicious champagne. And you haven't even laid hands on me, Mr. Grant. Grant mimed a kiss at her. I know. And it's damned hard, too. Make no mistakes about it. But Mrs. Grant brought her little boy up right, I guess. Truth was, you get enough bubbly percolating in those pea brains, display enough dazzle, and blow enough pheromones in their faces, and women touched you. A little trick Daniel Grant had learned early on and which kept him out of trouble. Oh well, he had his share of trouble all right. What with letting all those women touch him that wanted to, while he was still married to old iron drawers and building his companies. But you tread a fine line, and trouble that came your way tended to be the fun kind of trouble. The thrilling trouble. The trouble that made you feel like you were dashing down a ski slope on a power sled, not a garbage can lid. Anyway, really, what do you think of it? The picture of the USS Razia hovering in parking orbit above Earth. Right now, it was getting loaded up with supplies, weapons, men and whatnot for the expedition to the alien hive world. A trip that would bring back royal jelly, preserved DNA, and other treasures that would spell not only full financial recovery and put paid to any lost lawsuits, but place him, Daniel Marcus Grant, squarely back into pure honey of wealth. I don't know, it's kind of ugly. They'd had more than a few glasses of champagne, so things were kind of blurry. Grant examined the picture again. There it was, a whale of a ship, bubbles and glassine protuberances, making it look like some kind of colorful exotic beetle that had been pumped up with gas to the point of bursting. Aesthetically, it did look rather odd. Kind of like a strange cross between the jewelry kind of carbuncles and the flesh bump kind. Of course, that wasn't the way Grant saw it. He saw it as his beautiful, thrilling hope for riches beyond avarice. What is it? Said Mabel. Never mind, said Grant, tucking the photo back into his jacket pocket. Just a little business venture of mine. Let's talk about you. Oh, but Mr. Grant, Daniel, I'm fascinated by business ventures. Stick with the Grant industry, kiddo. We've got our share of businesses. Maybe we'll set you up as a special secretary for one of our branches. The eyes went wide. A slender hand touched his knee.
Oh, but Mr. Grant, that would be wonderful. I'd have to prove my skills to you first.
Grant plucked up the bottle of Dom Fauchignon from the ice bucket and poured some more champagne into her glass. I'm sure you will, my dear. He winked at her. And I, for one, am looking forward to the fruits of your official labors. They clinked glasses. Feeling positively ebullient, Grant tippled. This fake stuff sure wasn't classic, but it tingled and it did the trick. He was just finishing off the glass when a booming voice almost made him choke. Careful, careful there, my dear chum. A dim form moved out of the swirling, milling shadows of the hip night spot and clapped him on the back. Grant sputtered, struggled, and recovered, watery eyes blinking. Foxnail, he said, working hard to keep his voice neutral. What portal of Hades did you pop from? Ah, believe it or not, dear boy, said the cultured voice from the thin and wiry man with affected square spectacles and billowing silk clothing. I have not come here to torment you. In fact, if you ask any bartender or regular here tonight, they'll assure you that I am not a stranger to flickers. But this is a treat, especially with you in the company of such a charming young lady. Are you going to be a selfish cat and refuse to introduce us? Grant felt a distinct leveling of spirits. However, everything was still well within control. Mabel, this is Lardner Foxnail, principal stockholder and CEO of MedTech. Lardner, this is Mabel Planner, an employee and, new friend. My pleasure. Foxnail kissed the woman's hand to her obvious delight.
MedTech, why they make Wonder Diet. I use that all.
Suddenly, aware of her diplomatic error, Mabel cringed.
Oh, dear, I mean...
No problem, Mabel, said Grant. MedTech makes a quite reputable line of pharmaceuticals. This is a free enterprise system in which we work. And yes, Neopharm has quite worthy competitors, and we value them. After all, if there were no other companies, who could we constantly outperform? A muscle in Lardner Foxnail's jaw flinched. However, his eyes remained amused. Yes, quite. And this new enterprise of yours, this journey. Grant felt a thrill of alarm. Ah, you must mean... He began groping for some fake enterprise to put Foxnail off course. Oh, you mean the spaceship? Yes. Isn't it exciting? Mabel fairly jounced with elation. She looked over for approval from her boss, her gentleman date, and found cold eyes instead. She shut up immediately, to her credit. Indeed, Neopharm is looking toward colonial expansion. But then what Earth drug company worth its salt isn't? Said Grant aggressively. An artificial tick of a smile from Foxnail. Absolutely, and may we all prosper, he winked. But some more than others. A tip of an imaginary hat. By the way, Mrs. Planner, we're always in need of a good help at MedTech. Whenever you care for a free supply of Wonder Diet, please remember us. Quite unlikely, called Grant after him, barely hanging onto his temper. He waved for a waiter, and a photosensitive robot promptly smoothed up. What's riffraff like that doing in a reputable club like Flicker's? Pardon, honored guest, but Mr. Foxnail is the new owner. Lights blinked obsequiously. Grant started, did a double take, then smiled. Then that must be why the fellow ordered a bottle of Dom Perignon for the young lady here. He scratched his nose. And the caviar and crackers for me, come to think of it. I will see to it immediately.
He did,
said Mabel as the robo-waiter trundled off. Oh yes, a tradition between pharmaceutical rivals, my dear.
Oh, Mr. Grant, I'm so sorry if I said anything wrong. Is there anything I can do to make it up to you, perhaps?
Well, let's drink this next bottle of champagne and eat our caviar and have a serious discussion on the matter. The caviar was cold and quite good, and the Dom Perignon turned out to be far superior to Dom Foxnail. However, the conversation in the next half hour grew sour in Grant's mouth and ears, unspiked by sensual desire and an urge for sexual conquest. Damn it! Could Lardner Foxnail have gotten wind of what he was up to? Could he possibly know the destination of the USS Razia and the reason for the trip? If so, that could mean many things, none of them particularly good, several of them very bad. His mood seemed to grow fouler as he helped the increasingly drunk secretary finish their late-night treats among the wistful smells and pulsing sounds of Flicker's nightclub.
Mr. Grant,
she said, giggling at some stupid sarcastic statement he'd made about some politico.
You are so funny.
I think we've had a little too much champagne, Mabel.
But not too much caviar. I never could have believed that I ever would like fish eggs, but this stuff is just delish. I really am enjoying myself.
I hope you've saved some for friends, said a cold voice from the darkness. A swath of mist swirled away, and there stood a husky man with a scar riding along his bald pate like a bolt of lightning. He wore good clothes, and he smelled of good cologne.
Gee, another competitor, Mr. Grant?
Grant froze. Not exactly. Fisk. Morton Fisk. What was this old home night for demons from hell? Good evening, Grant. The man did not even look at Mabel. His piercing eyes just hooked onto Grant and hung on. I don't usually visit people personally. However, I do have a tradition. I like to make sure that my face is branded on the retinas of dying men. Fisk, what are you talking about? Grant had a suspicion, but he didn't even want to think about the possibility.
Who is this guy, Mr. Grant? What's going on?
Said Mabel. I told you, Grant, when you got me to bail you out, that I was a patient man. Until I wasn't patient. The scar on the head seemed to glow a livid pink, pulsing with contained rage. And I haven't been. You're months overdue. And you haven't even had the dignity to send partial payments. I am truly offended. Fisk, I'm not sure what you're talking about. You've been getting regular installments. A big fist grabbed a handful of his shirt, lifted him up so that Grant began to gasp for air. Lie! He lies to my face. You well know that I haven't gotten a penny for months. Indeed, Grant did know all too well. In the scrabble for solidity, and power after the Alien Earth War. Not all of the fortresses of judiciary control were entirely legal, and often, as not to get the leverage you needed for truly inspired buyouts, you had to go to these underground people for liquid assets. Unfortunately, they were criminals. Violent criminals. Self-confidence was always the anti-graw stuff for Daniel Grant. The by-your-bootstraps talent that hoisted him above the rest. Unfortunately, self-confidence could also be a blindfold. He well knew that he personally owed millions to Fisk and Company. But since for Daniel Grant, mañana was always golden, well, he'd pay them mañana when he had the money. Alas, he saw no mañana in Morton Fisk's eyes.
Look, Morty, sit down, pull up a glass of the warm South, get to know this delightful little creature, and for heaven's sake, let's jaw a while, huh?
Grant patted a comfortable cushion. Sorry. The big man spun on his heel and was swallowed up by the stylish mists and the nightclub gloom.
Mr. Grant? Daniel?
Said Mabel.
What kind of gorilla was that?
Not the gorilla of my dreams, said Grant, scooting over to the end of the booth. Look, I'll be right back, Mabel. Gotta visit the little boy's room. What had happened here? Had Foxnail tipped Fisk off to his presence here? That bastard! That must have been what had happened. Jeez! There were such sharks in business these days. He was at the edge of the booth when he heard a click. Instinctively, he dived for the floor. An explosion of bullets whacked over the top of him like lateral hail. He could feel their heat. He hit the floor and rolled, the sound of the machine gun echoing in his ear, the scream of his secretary joining in. He got a glimpse of the poor brunette jerking amid the passion of the bullets, blood yanked from the sweet body, making a mess of her dress. Glass and champagne and caviar spattered every which way in a phantasmagoric slow-mo fountain. The will to live turned Grant away from this death dance, and he scrambled away like a rat from a pack of cats.